What up, everyone? I literally just woke up in the middle of the night, struggling to go back to sleep. Lag has kind of got me a little bit, but anyways, I figure I'd just take the time out now to give you guys my thoughts on the DMC in Tokyo, Japan. 40 years of the dopest musical thing, in my opinion, on the freaking planet. There's no other way or around it. I'll just start with the open competition. No bias, obviously. I always give my thoughts to whoever I come across constructively, whether they're friends, whether they're foes, whatever the case may be. Beast mode, unequivocally smashed the competition, in my opinion. It is a reflection of the judges' scorecards that he did get unanimous first place votes across the board. I think him and the Ivory Coast dude, in my opinion, those two guys in particular, I think with the judges, they really wanted to send a message to the folks who were overly producing a lot of stuff. And with that, we just need to take it down to basics, blending, clean mixing, not relying on oversaturated production as a crutch, being able to taste make, digest, and read the crowd, whatever point you're trying to come across as the crowd, being able to digest that. A lot of factors in with that. It's a very tricky format because, it does run the risk of being exhausting, so props to Beast Mode. His style, it was practically made for that competition. Now with the classic category, I won't touch much on the scratching one because actually, you know what, might as well. I-Dee, French cat from the 9 o'clock crew. Shout out to my boy Victor, Mr. Victor. What I loved about him, aside from the technicality of it, is when you have just, you're just scratching samples there's no real structural composition. There is the composition of the combos that you'll be presenting and difficulties around it. But it runs the risk of becoming a major nerd fest, And so when you have an audience that doesn't necessarily understand the levels of the difficulty, but they're expected to be engaging in partaking, I think he did a brilliant job, especially with some of his double time cuts, to really bring a sense of energy and crowd involvement, because then once they saw his progression kind of building up from the very beginning, then that's when the competition really got super exciting. So shout out to 9 o'clock crew, A-O-Is. Now with the 6-minute classic, first off, shout out to all the competitors. It's very grueling going up on a world level, to perform and do that set. So pat yourself on the back for that one. What I will give a little bit of history on before I get into the competition itself is, when I started my battling career, I was about 15 years old. And one thing that I did when I came onto the scene, especially at such a young age, pre-YouTube, pre all this other stuff, was I didn't want to be that young kid that got by because he was young, which is why actually I could have entered when I was 14, but I chose to take a year off because I wanted to try to make sure that my skills were up to a particular level. So once I got my skills up to a particular level, I entered, did well. The first year I was in the DMC, there was like over 50-something people in the eliminations, and I made it to the top 10. Which was, my mission accomplished. And then 2 years later, I ended up making it to the, I think the following year, I placed 4th in a regional. And then 2 years later, 2 years after my first regional, I made it to U.S. finals. And then by the time I reached my 3rd year, I won my first U.S. title, which was the U.S. supremacy. But specifically, when I put together a lot of those routines, that very first year that I entered was probably the first and last time I did any sort of pattern that was rooted in strobing or chasing that was distinctively associated with that, you know? And I knew that I could never revisit that again if I wanted to reach the levels that I eventually did. And so that was my conscious effort with that. Now, I also grew up around Shifty. You know, we both kind of came up in the same era. And, you know, there was this unspoken consciousness between us as young kids that we knew we just wanted to keep pushing the envelope. We knew that, you know, we're coming off the tail end or the golden era of turntablism. So I knew without a doubt that we had to push it to those limits. So what we've seen then, and it's probably around, we can look at maybe 2007 or 2008. Once YouTube kind of came around, you saw the kind of the death of the DJ forums, death of sessioning consistently between amongst other DJs. God damn. And so what we're left with now, however many years later, is conversations amongst sub comments on Instagram. And there are a lot of yes people, yes men, yes women, you know. That's not really pushing the envelope or getting the feedback over to the DJs who genuinely really need it. I know there's a lot of DJs, especially the ones who compete over the weekend, who have a genuine interest in wanting to be the best and wanting to do best. I invite you to watch this with an open mind, with the understanding that you need to be able to judge yourself and you need to be able to see where you stand out within the competition. If you cannot do that, you're going to have a very, very hard time achieving whatever results you have. That's number one. Number two, I find it's more important to, from a musicality perspective, when people think of your name as a DJ, would you rather them think about you being a champion first or routine second? You know, I'd much rather them think about my routines. You know, if they're humming a routine or whatever the case may be, that's a sign of, okay, I've done something good and well. Now, with the DMC Worlds, it was almost kind of like, it felt like a vibe of the late 90s. And what I mean by that is it was, during that time, you had a couple people that kind of pushed the envelope, but then you had a lot of other people who just like, they're still establishing themselves within their country, so it's easy for them to kind of go to X-Men style patterns, you know, the chase and the strobe and whatnot. So over the weekend, it felt like a game of here comes the strobe, here comes the strobe, here comes the strobe. And this is what I mean to the other DJs. It's great to perform those. However, this was something, and Blakey kind of spoke about it in, I believe so, in this video. These are things that we did privately, behind closed doors, okay? Because we knew there is no sense in us doing it live, especially in a competitive environment. Now, if it's a showcase, if it's a tribute, or this and that, then yeah, then it's probably a better format. But if we're talking a world championship competition where, you know, we have to do some critical thinking to understand who's the best, then if everyone's doing the strobe, right, or element of it, then what's the next thing that we could treat them? Oh, well, who's being a bit more intricate? Who's doing something a bit more difficult? Who's doing something a bit more innovative, you know? But I think it's really easy for you to develop your own style based off the strobe, right? And I think that's the problem, or the era that we're living in right now, that people have just created everything based off the strobe. Whereas we could, if I'm coming up with a new routine, I might play around, start with the strobe or, some X-Men style buildups. And then accidentally, I might come across something that's cool and innovative. When I did my 2014 set, the winning set, I took, it was almost a full year and a half off. Now, what a lot of people don't know is I had that 6-minute set down for probably a good year in terms of order, in terms of song selection, before I did my first live battle. Now, the reason why I had it for so long is because I was able to basically up the level of difficulty and try to be new and innovative. And that's what led me to my success, because I wasn't too worried about the other competitors. If I'm being honest, I knew that if I pushed myself to certain levels, that the body of work would be undeniable. Now, if you can do a beat juggle that has a strobe, that has some chasing, that has all this and this, you mean to tell me that it's taken you that long to put that together? Because I can do that literally within a matter of minutes. Grab a song, whatever, and just start doing that. So again, I invite DJs who are in the competition to be able to judge yourself, critique yourself amongst your colleagues and your peers, and understand what is it that I'm doing to really push the envelope, and also maintain musicality, because we don't want this to become a chase fest or something that becomes overly technical or heavily produced. Now, going back to the competition itself, there's two last things I just want to point out, because I don't want this to be a really long thing. Again, if you want some really, really good analysis, head on over to Blakey's YouTube channel. It's really, really good. Now, one thing is the element of biting. Now, there's this unspoken rule that when a particular person, touches a song or touches a record, you don't do it. You just don't touch it, especially in a competition. Now, you might have Babu, his Blind Alley routine. No one dares touching that one, because that is arguably the holy grail, for example, of stuff. Now, going to Supremacy, right? We'll start with that. Now, Supremacy is a competition that the criteria that I notice from judges can continually fluctuate, meaning that they might feel one way one round and then another way a second round. A lot of it can be very energy based. A lot of it can be actual technical based or whatever. So I think, but also if we look back at years like the, and I'm talking strictly head-to-head battles, like a DJ Noise at the New Music Seminar back in the day. He had energy, he had disses, he had very entertaining routines that were catered perfectly for a head-to-head battle, And so when you have someone like a K-Swizz who comes into that, it's very, I think his style is perfect for that competition. Did I think he won the battle? In my opinion, I think he did. I do see the judges' perspectives of, they thought the Brazilian Cats, which by the way, shout out to him. He certainly did his thing. Yeah, he had a couple patterns at the end of his juggle routine that were a bit more intricate. But my argument with that was, and I said this to a lot of people backstage, was, if you're going to judge based on that, then you need to be consistent with that analysis on the previous rounds and hold everyone to that same standard. That's the way I would do it. That's just my 2 cents. But also, again, if I'm going into a head-to-head battle, I'm also going to be critiquing myself. What patterns am I doing that could potentially leave myself vulnerable to potential defeat? So am I doing a lot of buildup? Am I breaking stuff down? Are my breakdowns technically driven, or are they pretty simple? So those are questions I would want to be asking myself, you know. So, and that's why when I did do supremacy back in the day, I made sure that my even though it's a small frame, you know, 90 seconds, I wanted to cram as much as possible, but also not leave the you know I always say meat and potatoes. Like, you know, if you're just getting a bunch of appetizers or entrees, you know, within that 90 seconds, then I really haven't satisfied your craving. So I want to make sure that I give you something that's with depth and nourishing and satisfying. Now, going back to what I was saying about the biting. Now, I know K-Swiss did the King Cut routine, made famous by Akakabe. Now, the thing with Akakabe is he demonstrated a style of juggling that I haven't really seen very often, that is very, very difficult when you're using one hand to move the up faders, you know, back and forth. Now, if you're not going to push it to those levels, don't even touch that record. But second, you shouldn't even be touching that record anyways. In a battle, if you could do your triples all you want at showcases outside of a world championship competition, but we're talking about a world championship competition. There's hundreds, thousands, millions of records out there to choose from, right? When there's even battle records that say, you know, you're a biter, you know, like, so again, you need to be able to judge yourself, you know, critique yourself amongst your peers, and really, really see what it is that you might have gone wrong on, you know? So that was a big no-no, in my opinion. And I could see how that might have cost K-Swiss the L as well. Now with the top 3 of the showcase, but even with the top 10, again, I invite you to go, when you do see the full sets, play a game, the drinking game. You know, every time you see a chase pattern or a strobe or something, take a shot, right? Now, with the, I'll just focus on the top 3, you know. Now I'll start with the winner. Now, there is a lot of controversy with the winner, and I've been receiving some messages from a couple other people. Now, I'll start off now, a DJ by the name of John Swan. He received an email from the winner, DJ Fumi, years back, asking him, what record did you use in your routine? And it's a pretty popular record. It's Jam on It, you know. Now, I know that was probably before Shazam and everything kind of came out, but Fumi ended up going ahead and doing a routine with that. Now, I know in Japanese culture, they might think it's cool to do that, and I think there might be this hip-hop disconnect. I know there was a year where Fumi had a fro. So my first instinct, DJing aside, is there's a bit of appropriation going on right now, you know? And so when you're working on a routine, part of the routine is doing your due diligence. Number 1, seeing if anyone's had a routine with that before. Number 2, you know, you're putting in a lot of time and effort, you know, to put that, you know, routine together. And so for someone to just kind of come up and be like, hey, what song is that? And then not only just rip some of your patterns, and yeah, they might do something slightly a bit more intricate or, you know, doper. It takes away from the efforts that person has put into the routine. And so that's the big elephant in the room I think we need to address first. And then second, the only reason why that conversation came out of the woodwork is because Fumi ended up using a song called Love Me or Hate Me by Lady Sovereign, which a lot of people know I had a routine with many, many moons ago. And my objective with my routine, which, by the way, I could have, and this is almost 2 decades ago, I could have done that routine with really, really basic, repetitive stuff that people seen before. But again, I was trying to push the bar, push the envelope. So he ended up doing that, doing his rendition on it, which in my opinion, I thought it fell a little flat. live wise. Was he the most technically skilled DJ of the night? Potentially, arguably, again, going back to K-Swizz, I probably would have given it to K-Swizz, in my opinion. He did some blindfolded juggling, which was incredible, amazing, right? And he did it for a long time. He did it for a minute, right? Now, what I want everyone to take away from this discussion, and this is just me being devil's advocate, is when we take the blindfold away, is what he's doing difficult? Have we seen it before? And I think that's where the conversation lies between people need to distinguish between gimmicks and doing something that's never been done before. Now, we can look at Mysterio. We can look at DJ Koki from the Philippines. We can look at all these people from back in the day that, wow, I've never seen that before. That is so cool. But it is also a gimmick. Okay? So, when you do something that has never been done before, pause and think, is it a gimmick? Now, when I did my shit in 2014, it's never been done before, but it wasn't a gimmick. The reason being is because I wanted to push myself to technical levels that were to be, can you do this, right? I want to ask, can you do that, And so if you can do my routine, cool, by all means, more power to you. But if I can do your routine, that's a problem. RC3, this was my first time really properly seeing this kid outside of little clips on Instagram. If you were there live, he had the most sonically sounding set. It sounded very, from an audio engineering perspective, very bright, very, very dope. He has a lot of elements to be a world champion in the future. One thing I will say again is now that you've reached third in the world, and I hope you take this constructively, is don't think you just have to come with the same thing and then just do it again next year. Really push yourself to the limits in terms of juggling, especially because a lot of the stuff you've done or you did, we've seen before, and I wish I had the confidence I had at your age, at 17, but I, again, being devil's advocate, when I was 17 and I was in my U.S. finals, I'd put my juggles up against yours. And so there should be a clear difference between the two. So a reminder to the younger generation, please, we want you to succeed. We want you to outdo us. We want you to annihilate everyone, And so all we're asking for as we continue to preserve this amazing art form is just please do a little due diligence and just be able to constructively critique yourself. End of the day. Anyways, rant over. Hope that's shed some light on everything. And I'm either going to go back to sleep or go to the gym. So, peace.